Good morning, members. We've formed a quorum, and it's also the appointed time. Since the last meeting, we have issued 2 information papers. One is on adjusting the fees for adoption arrangement, and second, a joint letter dated the 5th of June from Mr. Chung-hung and Stanley requesting us to discuss support for parents with mental illness, patients with mental illness. Mr. Look, you are one of the signatories. Do you have anything to add? Chair, I think this is a topic warrants our attention. I hope we can have an early discussion of this issue as soon as possible, because when it comes to domestic violence and treatment for a mental illness, the waiting time is very long. In specialist outpatient clinic, the waiting time is particularly long for Central Kowloon and Kowloon East. Some of them have to wait for more than a year, and while waiting, there is no support service at all, and we have already expressed this concern to the Commissioner. I hope we can have a discussion of this in a panel. Please arrange, Chair. Thank you. Now, you have pointed out the problem, and that is the long waiting time for special OPD. The subcommittee under the Health Services panel should be the right forum to discuss it. We have seen domestic tragedies recently, and I understand that the Health Services panel has also received a request to discuss the support services for patients with mental illness. So I have discussed with Mr. Tommy Chung, chairman of the HSP. Hopefully we can have a special meeting convened in June to discuss mental health related issues. The topic will be support services for patients with mental illness. We're going to invite all relevant bureaus, and that is the Labor and Welfare Bureau, the Health Bureau, the relevant organizations, and all members of the Council to attend the meeting. Since the 2 members have raised this concern, and we're going to delete item 15 from our list of outstanding items for discussion. I understand that members would like us to discuss counseling services at community level. I will urge the administration to cover this topic in the special meeting to be convened in June for the 2 panels. I will ask the administration to respond to this point. Apart from the joint letter from Mr. Chung-hung and Mr. Stanley, we've also got letters from Dr. Dick Chi-yun and also members of the 4A Alliance, Ms. Lam So-wai, Mr. Scott Leung, Mr. Yang Wing-kit, and also Mr. Gary Zhang. They would like to discuss mental health-related issues. The letter will be sent to members later. In short, the topic will be jointly discussed by the panel of the Health Services, and also this. It will be convened within June. Next, the items for discussion for the next meeting. And if you have anything on the list of outstanding items you would like to discuss, do let us know. Ms. Lillian Kwok, 1 minute. Thank you. I'm very grateful to you, Chair. For item 8, implementing community emotional counseling services, you have asked the Bureau to respond to this point as well. I think this is quite relevant. Can we have a discussion of that as well? Mr. Gary Zhang. Now, at the last meeting dated the 5th of May, now ECB 132 2023/01, we've already added support services for the homeless. It was supposed to be discussed in July, but then For the updated paper for this meeting, the status has changed to be confirmed. So can we have this back? Because some NGOs are already preparing to discuss that item in July, so I was a bit shocked to see that it was no longer on the agenda for July. All right, any other comments on the list of outstanding items? Not just for the discussion in July. All right, let me report to you. Now, support services for the homeless. It's true, if my memory serves me, that we were going to discuss that in July. Yes, but then the administration hasn't given us a specific date. So if we can't cover it in July, hopefully we can do so within this year. I hope I'll be able to chair the discussion of this item. And then support for single-parent families. It was meant to be for June, but then it's now rescheduled to July. For the July regular meeting, we have two items proposed: support for single-parent families and also starting a new chapter in Hong Kong Social Welfare Summit, an item suggested by myself. Why do we want a discussion here? Because this is a major event for the social welfare sector. It's in the limelight, and also the Home Affairs Ministry of the central authorities and similar authorities from Guangdong and also the cities in GBA will also be represented in the summit. And this is about integration of social welfare services between Hong Kong and the mainland. And there is also a memorandum of understanding signed. Deputy Chairman Reverend Kuhn and also myself and also the Bureau have discussion of this already, and we would like members to discuss this as well. Any more from you, Reverend Kuhn, or no? Then that will be discussed in July. Mr. Zhang, if members do not object to having a longer meeting, and then because the administration has got, if the administration has got a paper on support services for homeless people, why don't we schedule a longer meeting for July? And hopefully in September, we can have a public hearing on support services for persons with disabilities. I hope that can be included into our list and let the administration know of our thinking as well. And I do have to report to you that for item 9, legislative process of the Children Proceedings Parental Responsibility Bill, this has got it's been on the list for a few years. So Reverend Kuhn and myself and Mr. Lam Sun Keung have met with the Bar Association and the Hong Kong Law Society. They have expressed great concern. Hopefully, they want the bill to be enacted as soon as possible. So instead of parental rights, the focus should be shifted to parental responsibility. When there are disputes in family matters, then instead of parental rights, we should talk about parental responsibility. Hopefully, when we discuss support for single-parent families next month, the administration can also give us an account of the process of this bill. Because the bill will only be invoked when a family is contemplating divorce. Okay. So much so for our July meeting. The third item on the agenda, proposed duty visit to mainland cities of the Greater Bay Area. The administration has issued a paper to members requesting members' view and suggestions. Now, I'd like to consult members on the following 3 points. First, do we agree that we should make a duty visit to Guangzhou and Zhongshan in between the 21st and the 23rd of August? And shall we invite non-panel members to join us? And 3, whether officials from the relevant government bureaus or departments should be invited to go with us. I have discussed with all members beforehand. We are going to visit the Guangdong province to look at their elderly services and also support for persons with disabilities. I think the priority should be elderly services since this is quite a hot topic in the community. Any view on the 3 issues I just mentioned? Anyone who objects? No? All right. The paper has been issued to members. Once again, members, do we agree that we should do this visit in between the 21st and 23rd to Guangdong, Guangzhou, and other cities in GBA in our capacity as members of the Panel on Welfare Services? I suggest that we allow non-panel members to join, and I suggest we also invite officials from the Labour and Welfare Bureau, the secretary, in fact, to accompany us. Members, do you agree to these 3 points? Any objection? No. So we will go to the House Committee, because the duty visit is going to use members' allowance for making overseas duty visit. So we need to report to the House Committee. Okay, so much so for this item, and we go into our agenda proper. Number 4, encourage developers to provide residential care homes for the elderly and residential care homes for persons with disabilities and private development projects. Government officials are already with us. Can I give the floor to Mr. Ho Kai-ming, Acting Secretary for Labour and Welfare, to introduce the paper to us? And you may also press the request to speak button. Thank you, Chair. We'd like to brief members on our proposals to encourage developers to provide RCHE and RCHD in private development projects. Given Hong Kong's aging population and the longer average life expectancy because of development of medical technologies, we have a growing demand for residential care services for the elderly and persons with disabilities. So we're using our enhanced board place scheme and also board place scheme for PRHD. So in addition to providing subsidized residential care services, in 2003, we also launched the incentive scheme to encourage provision of RCHE premises in new private developments in order to provide a wide range of residential care services for the elderly. In lease modifications, land exchanges, or private treaty gains, grants, on the condition the developer should comply with certain lease conditions, they can be exempt from payment of land premium for eligible RCHE premises. So far, we've received 7 applications. 6 have the support of the SWD, and the remaining 1 is temporarily put on hold due to a lawsuit over the title of the site. In 2022, the chief executive said that there will be more incentives to encourage developers to build and operate RCHEs in private development projects. Having reviewed the scheme, the Financial Secretary announced the direction of the enhanced measures in the 2023-24 budget, and details of the enhanced measures as follows.
First, relaxing the number of RCHE premises eligible for premium payment exemption and relaxing the maximum total GFA from not exceeding 5,400 square meters to 12,000 square meters. And of the total GFA permissible under lease, whichever is greater. Second, when calculating the total GFA of the entire project, the total GFA of the eligible RCHE premises in the private development project will be exempted and will not be counted in the original total permissible GFA of the entire project, allowing the developers to use the original permissible GFA for other purposes. By end June this year, the government will launch these enhanced measures and review them after piloting for 3 years. By end June, the government will upload the Land's Administration Office practice note onto the website for general public's reference. In addition, Land's Department will inform relevant stakeholders, including Real Estate Developers Association of Hong Kong and organizations of the RCHE sector. The Social Welfare Department will update the guidance note for the scheme, allowing existing RCHE operators and members of the public to have a better understanding of the enhanced measures, and will timely brief the RCHE sector on the enhanced scheme. In addition, the Financial Secretary announced in the 2023-24 budget that the Development Bureau and the Labor and Welfare Bureau will formulate a similar scheme for the RCHDs to encourage the market to provide more quality private RCH. Development Bureau and Lands Department will, in 2023, launch a similar scheme for persons with disabilities to encourage developers to provide private RCHDs in private development projects. That's all for my briefing. I would like to invite members' comments and views on this topic. Now, I'd like to ask members if there is anyone who has not pressed the request to speak button, because I'd expect that there will be more members putting questions in this next agenda item. Now, I'll read the order to speak first. Reverend Kun, Chang Pui Leung, Chao Siu Chung, Luk Chung-hung, Tik Chi Yun, Doreen Kong, and Shiu Ka Fai. When the session for Reverend Kun ends, I will draw the line. I will add myself to the list. Reverend Kun, 4 minutes, including question and answer. Thank you, Chair. First, I would like to ask about this. I see that the situation was not very ideal before the launch of this scheme. Now, I see that there is an exemption of premium payment. Has the government talked to the relevant private developers or Real Estate Developers Association if it's attractive enough to exempt the land premium? Second, for large-scale residential development, including RCHD, it may be easier, but for small-scale residential development, will you allow a higher block ratio such that they can also include this kind of premises in their developments? Thank you. Chairman, in terms of attractiveness, I think it depends on the market situation. With regard to the demand on the market, we launched this program to encourage private developers to provide residential service places. We adopt a multi-pronged approach to provide residential and respite services places, and the sources of supply will come from the plot ratio of 5 in the residential development. And we also have a special site scheme for NGOs and privately owned land to provide such services when they redevelop their projects. We will grasp every opportunity we can, and hopefully in the new developments we can provide such services as well. This is an enhanced plan, and we hope that it can be improved further. As for the second question, I would invite my colleague from the Development Bureau to supplement. Regarding your second question on small-scale residential developers, if they can apply for rezoning of their sites such that they can have a higher plot ratio, I think that this will be fine. Developers, when they have a different idea for their development of the site, then they can apply for rezoning of their outline zoning plan and submit the application to the Town Planning Board. Reverend Kun, do you have any follow-up questions? No. Members, I will ask Reverend Kun to chair this meeting on my behalf for a short period of time. Second, Ms. Chan Pui-Leung. Mr. Chan Pui-Leung, thank you. I am happy with this incentive scheme to encourage provision of RCHE premises in new private developments because this can increase the number of care services places. But I have two questions. First, when these RCHEs are constructed, will we ask the developers to think about geotechnical facilities because we have a shortage of manpower? For example, in terms of design or requirements, should we ask them to provide geotechnical facilities or products? That's my first question. Second question, I see that the charges for the RCHEs will be determined by the private developers. I understand that this is not a subsidy scheme. Is there any monitoring mechanism in terms of the service level and whether the service fees will be reasonable? Because the RCHC is tied in with a private residential development, in the future, if there are family members of the elderly or persons with disabilities, will priority be accorded to these elderly or persons with disabilities to apply for these service places in the RCHE or RCHDs? Thank you, Chairman. For these RCHE and private developments, these will be privately owned RCHE. We have legislation and regulations governing these premises. As well, these RCHE and RCHDs can join our subsidy scheme in, for example, bought place scheme. If they receive subsidy, then we have higher requirements. For example, on manpower, if they do not join any government subsidy, then they will have to fulfill the licensing requirements for private operation. We do have some monitoring or supervision. Your third question on priority, because this RCHE will be privately owned, so no priority can be accorded. But as for how the private developers will accept application for RCHE service places, then they can determine it by themselves. But if the private developers join our bought place scheme, then they will have to operate in accordance with the Social Welfare Department's requirements. As for requirements on geotechnical products or facilities, what we're talking about today is the arrangement for land lease conditions. As for the operation of the RCHEs in the future, there will be a separate set of regulations on it. We will look at the usage of geotechnical products on the market in the future. As for privately owned projects, we do not have such high requirements for them. But if they have joined our subsidy scheme, we will have requirements on hosts or lifters. Thank you. For private developers, they will apply the use of geotechnical products in their daily operation. Thank you. Next, Mr. Chao Xiu-chong. Thank you, Chairman. I welcome this incentive scheme to encourage provision of RCHE premises in new private developments or provision of RCHDs. But looking at the scheme, in 2003, it was launched and 10 years has passed. $200 additional service places have been provided. I think that the progress is not very ideal. I would like to ask the administration, you target that by 2027, you will add some 6,200 residential care service places for the elderly and 1,900 subsidized residential care services places for persons with disabilities. We have a long way to go. I hope that through this enhanced scheme, by exempting the GFA from the permissible GFA and to relax this GFA, we can have more services places. During the review period of 3 years, do you have any KPIs or expectations as to how many or how much floor space of RCHE and RCHD can be built? I hope that the administration can respond to these 3 questions. And how many residential care homes can be built by private developers in 3 years? Chairman, as for the 6,200 additional residential care service places, we're talking about subsidized places. The elderly will have to pay about 1,000. As for privately owned residential care homes, they'll have to pay $9,000 to $10,000 per month. What we're talking about today is private residential places. Of course, some private developers can join our government program, for example, box plate scheme. So this 6,200 figures is not directly related to our scheme today. As for KPI, I will invite my colleague from the development period to talk about that. As for the KPI, the administration adopts a multi-pronged approach to tackle the problem. We use the subsidized care service places for the basis of our KPI calculation. If this scheme is launched successfully, then I think that we can alleviate the stress in Hong Kong in terms of provision of RCHE and RCHD provisions. Development Bureau, please. Perhaps as supplement very briefly, as the acting secretary has said, what we are talking about today involves the provision of RCHE services places by the administration. In the past over 10 years, the response was not as good as expected, and we have reviewed our schemes. The problem seems to lie with the lack of incentive. So after reviewing the schemes last year, we will try to provide more incentive. The 3-year review period that we have determined is to encourage the private developers to apply or enter the market as soon as possible to provide RCHE and RCHD services places. In terms of administration, perhaps we did not do a good job in the past few years. For example, in terms of procedures, we will improve it. And previously, currently, the private developers will have to apply for a town planning board and to apply for rezoning of OZP. Having reviewed these procedures, we try to encourage these land exchange or rezoning in parallel with the application for this scheme with the Social Welfare Department, such that the applicants will not have to proceed with their projects step by step, so they can go through these procedures in parallel. In the past, we noticed that there were private developers or applicants that were not specialized in provision of social welfare facilities, so they may came across some difficulties in terms of application. So when this scheme is launched, we will, together with Lands Department and Social Welfare Department, reach out to Real Estate Developers Association and organizations of the RCHE sectors to brief them of the scheme. When necessary, the applicant, if they want to obtain views from the Town Planning Board or the Planning Department, then they can obtain such help and assistance. So we take a proactive approach to reach out to the potential applicants. We hope that with the assistance, we can have more encouraging response.
Dr. Teck Chu-yuen. Thank you, Chair. Of course, the scheme is good, and I was also involved in the previous scheme. We can promote public and private sector collaboration, and the government's provision of subsidized places is a far cry from what we need. Unfortunately, I learned that the scheme hasn't been too successful. We've only got very few successful cases, and the impact is insignificant. I think it's because the measure is too passive. As mentioned by the Bureau, there might be already incentives and encouragement provided. I doubt whether they can be effective. For instance, as a private developer, I will consider whether providing an RCHE there will be conducive to the value of the property, and there may be many ambulance trips going in and out of the development. Is that good for my development? So I urge the administration to be more proactive. For instance, can we specify in the conditions, the land sale condition, for instance, when you buy a site, you are required to provide an RCHE there. And if we adopt a laissez-faire approach, that is not very useful. So we should have land planning and have land lease conditions. And then we need the support of manpower resources. We can use INT and gerund technology. If a private developer has got a dozen or so development projects with the support of technology, and if the operation is actually better than subsidized homes, then the project will be very attractive. So I urge the administration to be more proactive, to urge private developers to participate in providing services for the elderly and PWDs. Secretary, thank you. When the conditions are right, we will add lease conditions to require the provision of such facilities. Members might have heard that at Caroline Hill Road project, in the lease conditions, we have required social welfare facilities to be provided to serve the needs of the community. But you have to understand that for some sites, there is no need for lease modifications, or it may be the case that the developer owns the site himself. So the scheme aims to provide more RCHEs in suitable conditions. When in newly granted land, this scheme can be used, but if the site is owned by the developer himself, we cannot impose conditions to require the provision of such facilities. And that's why we need to provide incentives for such services to be provided. In fact, we share the view of the member. For sites under different status, we will use different measures to encourage the provision of such facilities. I will invite the Development Bureau to supplement. Well, with regard to the reply from the Secretary, in future land sales, please add to your lease conditions that RCHEs or RCHDs should be provided. Can that be done? Development Bureau, short reply, please. Thank you. We fully agree with Dr. Teck. The scheme itself is a bit passive because the initiative rests with the private developer, but we're already doing a few things. First, in PRH developments, if GFA can be set aside for such facilities, we've already done that. And in land sale conditions, in the past few years, we've been doing what was suggested by Dr. Teague. In suitable projects, we have already included the requirement to provide LCHEs. For your information, in the past 5 years, that is in between 2018 to May this year, we have, through lease conditions, provided 104,000 square meters in 18 projects for provision of LCHEs. And in our land sale program this year, in 3 projects, we have required the successful bidder to provide LCHEs. So we will continue to do that. Excellent. Mr. Rincon. Thank you, Chair. When developers provide social welfare facilities, as mentioned by the Development Bureau, we have seen 18 projects in the past 5 years. Now, if such facilities are so important to the community, why is it the case that require property owners, future property owners of these developments to be responsible for the repair and maintenance of such facilities, the common areas of such facilities? This is not fair. For GIC projects, most property owners do not have to chip in the repair and maintenance of common areas of GIC projects. So is this arrangement fair to property owners? Since we are talking about private homes, now the Secretary said that it's difficult to demand the property developer to do this and that. This I can understand. But if there is demand for quality private care homes, they can take care of persons with dementia, for instance. If there are districts that have higher demand for such places, will we set some minimum requirements in these places? And secondly, can you tell us, in the future 5 years, how many more private care home places do we need? We are talking about the broad policy, but we have to know how much do we need roughly. Thank you. I will invite the Lands Department to take Ms. Kong's first question. As regards our overall planning, in our 2017 Elderly Services Blueprint, there were figures. Of course, there might be amendments, but then we need about 120,000 subsidized or community care homes. We have got about half of the demand, but we still have 5 more years to go. And we do not just rely on this enhanced scheme. We have subsidized places, and this enhanced scheme can provide part of the places we need. Lands Department. If in our land sale conditions we have added a term for provision of LCHEs, that will be done at the request of the Social Welfare Department. So once the LCHE is completed, it will be for the government to manage or operate the care home. So we're not talking about a private care home. The government is one of the property owners in that development. So the management fees, etc., will be borne by the government together with property developers. It's not that the property owners have to pay for the management and repair of an LCHE. No, I don't think that is the case. In a major maintenance exercise, I can tell you that it is the property owner's responsibility. I can show you the terms later, and this arrangement is unfair to property owners. I highly suggest that you give us real cases for the information of the government. Now, I'm the chair of this panel. I believe members are concerned about the number of places still or yet to be built. And December, when we discuss the elderly services program, we will discuss this again. So we have to bear in mind two things. First, we have gone through the fifth wave of the epidemic. So the figure or data may not be the same again. So the administration has to take note of this. In 2021, we have the centralized or uniformed assessment scheme. There was a major review of revision of the mechanism in 2015 that may have an impact on the total requirement as well. So please take note of this. Mr. Xu Kafei. In 2003, the government launched the incentive scheme to encourage provision of RCHG premises in new private developments. It's been 20 years. I'd like to know the number of places provided under the scheme and whether there's been any review of the scheme after 20 years. Well, after a review, we have decided to enhance the scheme. There are about 20 projects where developers had an interest, and we have received, in effect, 7 applications. 6 have been approved and 1 is still pending. So we have received 20 developers who indicated interest in the scheme. How many places can be provided? In total, 1,400. So in 20 years, you will be able to provide an additional 1,400 places, and therefore you have enhanced the scheme. I hope you can speed up because we are very short of care homes for the elderly. Now, we have 1,600 or so waiting for places. So as our population ages further, the queue will only go longer and longer. Some have been waiting for 150 months in order to get a place. And I don't think this is something you want to see. Of course, I support the scheme in principle. If you provide incentives in the form of relaxation of GFA for developers, I think this is good. So the limit will be raised from 5,400 square meters to 12,000 square meters. I don't know whether that is attractive enough to developers. You're going to review the scheme after 3 years, so let's wait and see. Apart from providing places in such projects, you should adopt a multi-pronged approach. I understand that Mr. Chris Sun, Secretary for Labour and Welfare, has recently met with Mr. Xia Baolong. And Mr. Sun has been asked to review our manpower projection in Hong Kong as second elderly services in the GBA. Can we relocate some of our elderly persons to GBA because prices are lower than, and we can have more spacious care homes. Perhaps our elderly persons can retire more happily there. So after meeting with Mr. Xiang Bolong, I'd like to know what progress do you have?
Chairman, I would like to clarify something. I think when you were talking about 150 months, you were talking about the waiting time for RCHDs. For subsidized places, I think the waiting time is about 36 to 38 months. and it's only 5 months for the waiting time of about place scheme places. As for the RCHE programs in Greater Bay Area, we will review that in the second half of this year, and we will launch the details of the scheme. I would like to thank the Guangdong authorities for helping us with this area, and we hope that by the second half of this year we will promulgate the details. Over the past 3 years, I've been encouraging you to integrate into the Greater Bay Area with regard to RCHEs. I've been asking you to provide me with information why there's still vacancy in the RCHEs in the Greater Bay Area. There are 2 RCHEs in the Greater Bay Area. I would like to know the reason why there are still vacancies. Mr. Siu, if possible, you can refer to the duty visit that we paid to the Greater Bay Area on the 21st to 23rd of August. Next, Ms. Lillian Kwon. Thank you. On development of RCHE in the Greater Bay Area, I see from the entire set of papers you detail the measures in Hong Kong to encourage developers to construct residential care homes for the elderly and persons with disabilities. I agree with what Mr. Siu talked about, that we have spaces for development of RCHE and RCHDs, and the cost is just 1/4 compared with Hong Kong. And I visited some places in the Greater Bay Area to see if there is places suitable for construction of such facilities. I think that the Greater Bay Area is a very beautiful place with much greening. When I paid visits to the area, and there were some developers who were interested in constructing residential care homes. But in terms of supportive services, what do we have? If we can construct RCHE and RCHDs in the Greater Bay Area, will there be bought place scheme in there as well? I told the developers that we have similar schemes in Chung-hung, for example. I think that we can consider it. For future development, we should not just adopt past practices for future development. If we have to improve our residential care policies, we can take reference from overseas experience. Apart from RCHEs, we can encourage aging in place or aging in homes. I see that in some overseas countries, they have residential care places and some residential developments in the form of hostels or hotels to encourage family members to live near the elderly so that they can live together. I think that this is the direction that we can consider in the Greater Bay Area in terms of how we can improve the services provided and to create a small community such that the elderly will not feel trapped in the residential care homes. I hope that the administration can consider it. Thank you. Acting Secretary, I think the question put by Ms. Lillian Kwok is not directly related to the item of discussion today. Chairman, we will have a detailed evaluation in the second half of this year. I think it does not only have to do with RCHE, but also insurance, medical care insurance. And we should also collaborate with the authorities in the Greater Bay Area because we have different requirements. We are working out the details currently, and we will inform members in due course of the details. Thank you. Next, Mr. Lee Chung-hung. Thank you, Chairman. The topic of this paper is to encourage developers to provide residential care homes for the elderly and residential care homes for persons with disabilities. I think that this term encourage is rather negative. I think we should require or request them to provide such facilities. As member has suggested, should we include these conditions in the land lease for better development? Because in the northern metropolis and the Kaoicha artificial islands. Should we take a more proactive approach to improve on this area? There is limitations with RCHEs. The height from ground should not exceed 28 meters. I think this restricts the design of private developers. Should they reserve the place for clubhouse or malls to provide residential care homes? I think you're putting designers and private developers in a very difficult situation. There are a lot of places, residential care homes in Hong Kong that are very successful. For example, the one in North Point, to allow elderly to buy places to reside in them. And on the ground floor, they have some rehabilitation centers such that the entire building can provide one-stop services for the elderly. Can private developers do the same thing, such to build buildings for the elderly and to provide services to them? I would like to know about the administration's direction. Undersecretary, please. Chairman, I would like to clarify one thing. We're not talking about the land under land sale or land auction. Land sale is another thing. On some projects, we have added some land sale or land lease conditions to ask developers to provide such facilities. But we are talking about how we should encourage the private developers to include RCHE. Those private developers would already have the piece of land, and we're talking about land lease. Well, the Urban Renewal Authority is a semi-government organization. How many projects in Kwun Tong have included such RCHE facilities? Chairman, because for Urban Renewal Authority, it involves the purchase and sale of land. The URA will have their own arrangement, but for current landowners, it is not under the such requirements. But if it does not involve land transactions, how do we encourage the landowners to provide such RCHE facilities? This is the topic of discussion today. We're not talking about land transactions here. Excuse me, as Mr. Lee suggested, he was asking if you have considered asking the project holders under URA to provide such facilities. For Mr. Lee's question, it's true that there are some private developers who own the piece of land, and we hope to encourage them to provide RCHE premises. But if URA has purchased the piece of land, how come they do not provide RCHE facilities in those sites? What we want to say is that if there are private developers who come to us for land transactions or change of lease modifications, town planning procedures will have to be gone through, and they will have to conduct land exchanges with the lands department. In the process, we may invite them to consider providing social welfare facilities, including RCHEs. There have been such cases in the past, because one of the considerations is that when they're applying for these modifications, the town planning board members will look into the needs on the market, and they will encourage them to provide social welfare facilities when they are rezoning the outline zoning plan. We've seen such cases, and there are some private developers who were willing to do so. So apart from encouragement, we want to provide also through this scheme incentives for private developers to provide such facilities, and there's been past cases of such. My question was not answered. How many places have been provided in Kwun Tong project? Kwun is a very special project because there are a lot of PRH estates in Kwun. I think we can provide social welfare developments in the public rental estates. I think we could look at the demand in the district to provide such facilities. The height restrictions has not been addressed. Should I pose some follow-up questions? I think that you should be skillful in your follow-up questions because I do not want to delay the item and affect the next agenda item. I will be the last to speak. Acting Secretary, with these 3-page papers, you are very focused on the enhanced scheme. When you have more figures, for example, how many additional social welfare facilities is provided with this improved land restrictions, why don't you put these figures in the papers? For example, how many RCH residential care places have been provided by the private developers. I think that this will enhance the understanding of the LegCo members because we would like to look at the bigger picture. Second question. For these 6 projects that have been approved, I read from the papers that in 2021, there are 200 non-subsidized residential care places that have been provided. So are there 5 outstanding applications that have not been constructed and they have not been under operation? And I would like to know about the timeline and where will these care homes be constructed? I would like to know about the locations. I noticed that in some aging districts, there are wet markets and malls under Link Ridge. And Link Ridge redevelop or renovate the interior of the facilities to provide social welfare facilities. So is this practice of Link Ridge in line with your scheme? So say for a wet market or commercial mall, if they renovate the interior space to provide social welfare facilities, will this private developer be exempted from land premium payment? Because in Kowloon East, Hing Tin Estate and Lok Wah Estate, similar cases have happened. And I would like to know why they are so actively renovating their spaces to provide social welfare facilities. Is it because of the exemption of land premium? Another question. If you exempt land premium for land transactions, can the private developers set aside a piece of land for RCHEs and another place for residential developments? Can the private property owners access the social welfare facilities? And in such cases, will the land premium be exempted?
Thank you, Chair. Now, for this scheme, we'll talk about new private development projects. Either you build a development from scratch or you redevelop an existing development. So it is up to the private developer to redesign its features so long as it hasn't breached the land conditions. That is fine. But the lands department may want to supplement on this. For instance, there may be a shopping mall and it may be in an RA zone. Will there be more detailed restrictions on the lease? That can vary from cases to cases, but that doesn't involve this project. Secondly, the number of the figures under the scheme. I invite Mr. Yong to supplement. Thank you, Chair. We are talking about private new developments. There are 7 so far. 1 has been completed in Chinon, 4 in Yunnan, 1 in Sai Kung, 1 in Kowloon City. The site in Sai Kung, because of some legal issues, there is some dispute over the tide, and for the remaining 5, we already given our policy support. The progress of works will depend on the developers themselves, and so far we haven't got any information. Have they started construction? As far as I understand, they haven't. So the scheme has been in place for 20 years. You've given them approval, and they have yet to start the construction. Well, not all of them applied 20 years back, some only in recent years. So the scheme has been in place for 20 years, but some of the applications only came in a few years ago. But since they have not started their works, they can change their mind, right? If they have applied under the scheme and we've given them exemption, will require them to complete by certain dates, and it's clearly set out in the lease what will happen. Thank you. Any more? No. Well, all of a sudden we have a few members joining the queues. Why don't we allow each member 2 minutes, and then I will draw the line after that. Mr. Chen Han-peng, Mr. Lee Chen-keung, Dr. Dick Ji-yun, and Mr. Ling Kwok, 2 minutes each, and then we will go on to the next item. Mr. Chen Han-peng. Thank you, Chair. I think this is a good policy because it can encourage private landowners to provide RCH places. We can also, they can have more GFA as well. I've got a few questions for the administration. First, there are cases already, there are applications already submitted. I'd like to know whether they can benefit from the enhanced measures. And secondly, many care homes would like to import workers. Can you allow quarters for imported staff at 24 meters above floor, because during the pandemic they needed care workers to take care of residents in a closed-looped arrangement. If you can relax this, that can help the importation of labor so that they can have accommodation. And secondly, for our CHDs, you have included that in the scheme. I'd like to know whether you have any plan for relaxing the terms for our CHDs. Yeah, so quarters are covered. So the RCH premises will include both places for residents and for staff. So provision of quarters for staff, we've already changed our guidance notes for the scheme, and that will be allowed. And for a bought place scheme for our CHDs, we don't have information, and that depends on the provision of places. What about those applications already approved? Can they benefit under the enhanced measure? Well, we talk about new applications. For applications already approved, the old scheme will apply. Please see whether you can allow approved applications the same incentives. Thank you. Mr. Lee Chen-keung, we asked so many questions because we want more support services for our elderly and persons with disabilities, given that our population is aging very quickly. My question hasn't been answered. Now, I was told that in Kwun Tong there are many such projects, so you don't have to provide more places there. But what if people want to move to Kwun Tong? You have to think out of the box. And as for height restriction, are you going to relax the height restriction? Will the 24-meter restriction remain? Can you give us more information? Thank you. Thank you. The restriction of the 24-meter, well, under the Welfare Services panel, there is a subcommittee chaired by Mr. Chung-hung. We've already discussed that. Now, if RCHEs are to be provided at premises 24 meters above the ground, then other conditions will apply. We will have additional requirements if RCHE premises are provided at over 24 meters above ground. No more questions. Thank you. Secretary, at this moment, I'd like to know whether there are any RCHEs built at over 24 meters MPD. We don't have any. All right. Dr. Dick Xi-Yun, a very simple question. Now, if a private developer has land and under the paper, there can be incentives to encourage him to provide RCHE premises. I don't have high hopes for this scheme. You expect someone to marry you, but you don't offer a lot of incentive. I think it's time review the supply of RCHEs. Now, for our PRH development, 5% of the GFA will be set aside for care homes. We can see major supply from GBA. This will happen within a few years' time. Now, I'm quite worried. You may have enough supply of places, but no demand. Right now, you don't have enough care workers, not to mention drivers and also cooks. You have to look at the new supply and demand situation given this prevailing social situation. Now, if the panel wants us a more comprehensive paper, well, as mentioned by the chair in December, we are going to have a broader discussion of this topic. Now, the paper is mainly on this project, and therefore we haven't come prepared. And if members want information, we're happy to provide it. Let's have a more comprehensive discussion in December. Don't just give us a few pages. Mr. Lin Kwok, thank you. I mentioned GBA and also community and rehabilitation services of care homes that may not be relevant. I'd like to talk about Para 11. Now, you want about 10% of the floor area to provide facilities such as care cafes and staff quarters or clinics and training centers, etc. I think what you proposed is not really attractive enough, and I'd like to know the reason why you have set it at 10% of the GFA. I think Ms. Kwok was referring to Para 11 of the background brief prepared by LegCo. Well, the paper was compiled by the Secretariat. That paper is not from the administration. How do you arrive at the 10% of the total GFA? All right, you have enhanced your scheme to allow 10% of the total GFA permissible under the lease for providing RCHE premises. Well, we have a checklist, a wish list that can be KGs, kindergartens of RCHE premises. There are 10% of the total GFA for welfare-related facilities, such as training rooms and offices. That 10% has got nothing to do with the 10% of the total GFA permissible under lease in this enhanced measure. So I'd like to know whether 10% is good enough. Shouldn't you review it? I think we are all talking about 4A enhanced measures, and that is using up to 10% of the total GFA permissible under lease for RCHE premises. And the criterion or the basis for setting that, well, we're talking about 10%, but for different purposes. Can we focus on para 4A, please? Maximum total GFA of not exceeding 54,000 to 12,000 or 10% of the total GFA permissible under lease, whichever is greater. What is the basis of this 10%? A short reply. Now, for projects under the Development Bureau, when we provide exemption, usually it will be 10%. But then the current scheme will be reviewed after 3 years. So it's subject to the response of the market. All right, let's wrap up this item. We have overrun by 6 minutes already. The next item is support for carers. Again, Mr. Ho Kai-ming, Acting Secretary for Labor and Welfare, is present to answer members' questions. So members, if you have questions, please press the request to speak button now.
好，咁請
Yes. When officials have settled down, we can start.
啊，我有個表，我有個表。好。OK。好啊，今日
Present today, we have representatives from the Labor and Welfare Bureau as well as the Social Welfare Department, led by Mr. Ho Kai-ming, and the Acting Secretary for Labor and Welfare. We have Ms. Viga Wong, Commissioner for Rehabilitation, and also Mr. Alex Wong and Ms. Hannah Yip, Deputy Director and Assistant Director of Social Welfare, respectively. All right, 6 members. Let me repeat, if you intend to speak, please press the request to speak button now. Mr. Ho Kai-ming, Acting Secretary. Thank you. Chair, the government attaches great importance to the needs of PWDs and carers. I would like to report to members our progress on enhancing support for carers. Now we have set aside another $527.5 million to regularize 4 financial assistance schemes under the Community Care Fund. The pilot scheme on living allowance for carers of elderly persons from low-income families, and the another one for low-income carers of persons with disabilities will be increased to $2,000, and special care subsidy for severely disabled will be increased to $2.5, and also subsidy for hiring of carers $5,000. We have already collaborated with the Hong Kong Jockey Club Charities Trust to commission the Hong Kong Shu-Yan University developed website for a one-stop information gateway.
The Social Welfare Department will commission NGO to set up a 24-hour designated carer hotline, which will be manned by professional social workers to provide instant consultation and counseling, outreaching, emergency support, and referral services. The hotline will commence in Q3 2023. The Social Welfare Department have improved the respite services such that carers can, through the same system, identify day respite service places. The hotline can facilitate carers to reach out to support services and respite places. The Social Welfare Department will continue to increase the day respite service places. The Social Welfare Department will also put in place $15 million to enhance the publicity services to create this carer supportive community, and there will be publicity programs and education programs, in particular the community peer network, to provide actual help to carers. On top of that, in October 2023, the support for carer projects will be extended to needy elders and their carers. And the project aims to provide basic training to frontline property management personnel, such to equip them with knowledge on how to identify and assist needy elderly persons and carers, to provide them with information on welfare services in the community so that they may make use of the community resources when necessary to support aging in place for elderly persons. The government is also exploring the possibility of providing support to carers and elderly by community care teams. We would like to invite members' views on how we can improve on this area. Now I read out the order to speak. Taek Ji-yoon, Doreen Kwong, Chao Xiu-chung, Chung-hung, Pan, Lillian Kwok, Gary Zhang, and myself. If you would like to speak, please press the button. When Dr. Taek has finished his session, then I will draw the line. Dr. Taek, please. Thank you, Chairman. We welcome the measures on improving the support for carers. 4 minutes, including question and answer. Excuse me. We welcome the measure, but in recent years, we've seen increasing stress and difficulties faced by carers. I think that the support provided by the government is not sufficient. I think, and I hope that it will be improved. I have a few questions. First, as for the definition of carers, it covers carers for elderly and persons with disabilities. But what about parents of SCN children? Is it covered in the definition of carers, and will their needs be covered by your scheme? Do SCN parents, are they a kind of carers? There are 10,000 service places for carers, and we have over 300,000 of such carers in the community, and the 10,000 service places is highly insufficient to address the needs of such large amount of carers in the community. And will you review the number of service places or respite places? For CSSA recipients, will they be ineligible to apply for the assistance schemes of the government? Well, the 24-hour hotline and online support will be provided by the end of 2023. I don't think that this will address the stress of the carers. There are community centers currently. I know of 2 of them, and seemingly the Jockey Club will provide also a community center to serve the elderly or PWD. Will the administration learn from these community centers, and will similar centers be set up by the administration? Acting Secretary, please. Thank you, Chairman. While SCN, special education need, covers a large scope of people, it includes students or children with autism, etc. We include SCN in the definition of disabilities or persons with disabilities. But for carers of people outside of persons with disabilities, then they are not covered in our schemes. So we focus on carers of elderly persons and persons with disabilities. Chairman, for SEN with special needs, you will cover them in your schemes. Can you give us a definition? Because you said that SEN covers a large area of needs. Can you name some examples? Chairman, there are 10 categories of SEN with disabilities. If they are covered, or if they are persons with disabilities, then we will cover them in our schemes. But if the SEN children are not ones with disabilities, then they will not be covered in the scheme of discussion today. Dr. Take, any follow-up questions? There are two questions that still have not been addressed. On the subsidy places of 10,000, will you review the numbers? Second, will you establish community centers? Chairman, we have just regularized the scheme. As our next step, we will look at the number of applications to see if we should review the number of subsidy places. On local support community centers. Well, there are some NGOs setting up community centers, and we will look at the effectiveness of those centers to see if we will include such initiative in our future planning. Next, Ms. Doreen Kwong. Thank you. I have a few questions. First, in paragraph 5 of the papers, the government will provide additional funding of 527.5 million to regularize the assistance schemes. For these $500 million, how many people will be benefited? There's also a mention on the paper to establish a one-stop information gateway. Will this gateway help carers in terms of their psychological or mental health? Setting up a designated carer hotline in paragraph 8, how many people will take up these calls? If the hotline is only manned by a few people, then I don't think that is enough. As it's already in operation, I would like to know how many people are manning the hotline. Next, enhancing respite services. I would like to know the percentage of use because it's not something new. So I'd like to know about the figures. In this paper, the administration says that there's been progress. But as we all understand, carers are in a very difficult situation. I met with some of them last week. These measures are stopgap measures. As Dr. Tick has said, now we are providing assistance to carers of elderly persons and persons with disabilities only. But for SEN children or children with cancers or mental illnesses, they require carers as well. So when will assistance schemes be providing to these people, and when will you review the entire policy on carers? For the $500 million, we're talking about the funding after regularization. We target that 10,000 people will be benefited. But for pilot scheme on living allowance for persons from low-income families, 3,543 people benefited. For carers of elderly, 7,548 people benefited. For a subsidy for severely disabled, 5,441 people benefited. For providing subsidy for high disability in paid employment, 41 people benefited. Because the people time and the subsidy times are different, because some people withdrew after some period of time, so we target that about 10,000 people will benefit with such funding. As for the information gateway, is to provide information to carers such that they know more about their own situation. But I think that hotline will be more of a help to these carers in terms of their psychological or mental problems. The hotline will be manned by more than a few people. We are conducting an invitation of tender. We target that, for example, when some social incidents happen, then people may call this hotline, and we hope that we can have a more imminent response. We hope that by this hotline we can address needs in the society. When no one calls the hotline, then we may reduce the number of people manning the hotline, but there is not a designated number of people manning the hotline. It changes from time to time, depending on the social situation. Thank you. I have a follow-up question later. If you have follow-up questions, please press the button again. Mr. Chao Xiu Chong, please. Thank you, Chairman. Currently, for the support of carer policy, it only covers the elderly or persons with disabilities under the central waiting list. I welcome the policies to enhance support for carers put out by the administration. But have you considered any tools for assessment to widen the scope of the definition of carers? Because we saw some tragedies happening recently, and these people or carers may not be covered under your definition. Very often, these will be carers that are taking care of patients in the hospital, and sometimes tragedy happened. Has the Social Welfare Department considered collaborating with the Housing Hospital Authority to identify high-risk carers such that we can widen the scope of the carers to also take care of this group of people? Another question has also been put by Ms. Doreen Kong on the designated carer hotline. For mentally troubled carers, I think that it is helpful to have this 24-hour designated carer hotline. It will be commenced very soon. I would like to know about the manpower allocation and the budget of this hotline. Will it be sufficient to meet the needs? And how do you promote this carer hotline to enhance the usage? I will invite my colleague to supplement or answer these questions. I would like to thank Mr. Chao Xiu Chong for his question. On the definition of carers, currently we follow the definition or assessment criteria promulgated by the Social Welfare Department. For the person under assessment, if they are defined as having moderate or severe impairment, then the carer of these people will be carers under our definition. With this definition, we will be able to identify their needs more promptly. Will there be carers not under the assessment mechanism? Currently, the Labor and Welfare Bureau and the Hospital Authority have launched a scheme on discharged patient carers. We will enhance the scheme. For elderly who have been discharged from the hospital, we will have a follow-up scheme. Currently, we have a support for carers project for property management personnel because they see needy elders or persons with disability and their carers from a day-to-day basis. So we provide training to them, allowing them to identify needy elderly persons and carers. We had a pilot scheme on this project. As mentioned by the Undersecretary and in the paper, we will widen the scope of this project to cover persons with disability and elderly person carers. So apart from assessment criteria and definition, there will be other projects in place for us to provide assistance to carers.
Deputy Director, with regard to the dedicated carer hotline, we should be able to process 300,000 calls per year. As said by the Acting Secretary, well, depending on the need. For instance, when there are social incidents, then we can adjust the number of personnel to man the hotline. Anyway, we will retain a double-digit number of lines and people to man them. double digit. Well, 10 or 99 above double digit figures. I hope you can give us clearer information later. Mr. Chen Hanpeng, thank you. In terms of financial assistance, you have regularized the schemes, although the amount is not really substantial. For people, carers of SEN and demented elderly, I don't know whether you would regard the latter as a serious impairment, because demented elders do need care. Will they be covered in your financial assistance schemes? And for persons of disabilities, the waiting list for RCHDs is very long, and the waiting time is very long as well. So can you increase the number of places under your enhanced board place scheme for RCHDs so that carers can be given relief? And the government will consider enlisting the help of district services and community care teams. That's an excellent idea, because care teams are district-based. They can have great potential in taking care of carers, but their funding is limited. Financial support from the government is limited. Can the government provide extra money for care teams so that they can have enough manpower and professional support to serve the carers? What is the government's plan in this regard? First, our demented elders, because there can be early, medium, and late stages. So if he is already at the medium or late stage of dementia, then carers will be eligible. Also, he will be eligible for waiting for residential care. So after an assessment, the subsidy will be paid to him. When it comes to the care teams, we understand that their strength lies with their community network. But we really can't expect volunteers to provide professional services. Our initial thinking is for them to help us to identify and reach out to needy carers, and then they can refer these cases to NGOs in the district for follow-up. We will, of course, provide appropriate resources for care teams. When it comes to the actual amount, we're discussing with Chunwan and the southern districts where care teams have already been established. We'll look at the mechanism, and we will also announce the financial support available in due course. Of course, I know that care teams are just established quite recently. They may not have sufficient resources. I hope you can start pilot schemes for care teams to take up these cases. Because if you expect referrals, now very often people have trust for these care teams and they may not like referrals. We've seen cases where follow-up was far from satisfactory when referrals were made to another organization and the outcome was not very positive. Please consider asking care teams to help, and they are now already providing services to carers. I hope you can start using them so that people can have more confidence in their referrals. Any supplement? Do you have any involvement with the Chunwan care team? I don't have any. All right, no declaration is required. Ms. Lilian Kwok, thank you. I'm pleased to hear that the government is very positive in building a friendly environment for carers so that they can have more support and they can take better care of their family members in need. What do you think carers need most? I hope to have an answer from the Bureau first. What do carers need most? Now, carers look after people who need care. So, when carers need some respite, we will try our best to support them. And this has always been views expressed by LegCo as well as deputations. Well, let me share with you the following. Last week, we set up a counseling voluntary team, and we're already handling some cases. Of course, carers need respite, and emotional support is just as important. Very often, tragedies take place when the emotion cannot cope anymore. So, of course, it's good that you have a 24-hour designated carer hotline. That is better than none. But most carers would want face-to-face counseling services. So after receiving a call, how much resources will be allocated for face-to-face counseling services? Please stick to one language, either English or Chinese. Assistant Director. Thank you, Ms. Kwok. The designated carer hotline do not just receive calls or provide counseling on the phone. Depending on the need of the case, we will also provide face-to-face counseling, outreaching, and referral services. The hotline will allow us to reach out carers in need. For sure, we will have a network of services to follow up. Based on the needs of the carers concerned, we can offer face-to-face services and other referral services. What about the manpower arrangement? How many of the hotline team can provide face-to-face counseling services? Now, we have just set up a voluntary counseling team. We have social workers, clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, psychiatric nurses, and counselors, etc. If you just rely on social workers, now my worry is things will go wrong during the waiting period and in between referrals. So how much manpower is available to monitor changes in cases? Administration. We are now still receiving proposals to provide the hotline service. We believe different carers have different needs. As mentioned by Ms. Kwok, some need in-depth counseling. Some need information, referrals, and other services. So counselors, social workers, clinical psychologists are needed as well. Once the service starts, we will continue to monitor the needs of our carers and make adjustments in our manpower accordingly. All right. Please wait for a second round if you have follow-up questions. Mr. Gary Zhang. Thank you. There is a report compiled by the Hong Kong U in 2020. It was reported the need of carers. There was a definition for carers. Now, for those who are carer is defined as a person who provides ongoing, regular, unpaid care or support a person who has illness, disability, frailty, mental health problem, etc. Now, the report has been accepted by the administration, and some of the suggestions are also accepted. How about in providing subsidies and in implementing the policies? How come the definition is much narrower than what's in the report? I'd like to know the reason for that discrepancy and how come there's been changes in the government's position. And we also talked about carers of SEN, students with special education needs. According to the administration, you will adopt a phased approach. You will take care of some groups first. I'd like to know when you can be more comprehensive in covering different carers. Of course, we have definitions in the report. Our policy intent is to help them. The person in need may have different needs, and the carer may then have different needs as well. Some need cash support, but some of the needs cannot be taken care of by cash support. Some may need respite services, some need other types of services. So the 4 financial assistance schemes will cover a large portion of the carers. And the services they need can be procured with cash in the market. We've also got NGOs to provide services to carers to take care of their needs. So far, we've only got 4 financial assistance schemes. We haven't covered all sorts of carers. Well, according to that phased approach, what about the time to cover carers of SEN students? If children with special needs fulfill the definitions for disability, we'll cover them. And furthermore, that will be the next step. Mr. Chung-hung, thank you. To serve our carers, we have to first think of what, and second, whether carers know of the availability of these services. Now, for the former, we have been talking about more services for carers. There is always room for improvement. And secondly, how can you ensure that carers are made known of the availability of these services? So the flow of information is important. The FTU has said that you should use your district elderly care service centers to disseminate information to carers of elderly persons. But then, of course, we have quite a lot of members in this elderly care centers, but it's less than half. Well, we have 1.5 million elders, but only 220,000 of them have joined elderly centers as members. At least in PRH developments, you know the address and also the age of elderly residents, in particular for household with an elderly couple, then you should default their membership in district elderly services centers. Of course, they can opt out, but then once they are members of these centers, you can give them regular newsletters or even electronic messages, and their staff and volunteers can visit these households on a regular basis. I think that is the most direct link with elders. Will you consider this suggestion?
Acting Secretary, please. Thank you, Chairman. I agree that we should make people become aware of the services provided. We will inject resources to bring these information to residents of the district as well as the elderly, because after all, for every 2 districts, there will be 1 community centers. As for care team, we have 1 per district. They have a better grasp of the situation in their respective district. So through community care team, we hoped that we can provide such services to the carers and elderly. and the elderly neighborhood centers will provide such services. They also are responsible for promoting geotechnological products, so we have high hopes for these centers. As for better dissemination of information, I think that we can do that through various channels. Chairman, for community care teams, they may not have a very comprehensive address book. They may not be aware of where the elderly live. But for elderly residing in our public rental housing estates, are the elderly neighborhood centers afraid of too high of a demand or if insufficient resources? Have the administration considered asking these centers to reach out to the elderly? For hidden elderly, well, for elderly who have joined the scheme, they are very active. We have to identify the elderly who do not know how to secure resources to make them a member by default. This is what the government can do. Chairman, there is issues relating to privacy. We have to respect the wish of the elderly as to whether or not they want to join the scheme in the first place. We hear members' view. We will consider it. Thank you. Next, it will be my question. I have a few points to make. First, there are a number of enhanced schemes or new schemes from A to F in the paper. We welcome these schemes and measures. We hope that they can be implemented as soon as possible. As far as I understand, well, sorry, it's not F. It's A from G. We hope that you can enhance the provision of respite service places. Even when the number of places are increased, the usage rate is low. What is the reason? Is it because the people in need who are not aware of the service places, or is it because there are some administrative hurdles to come across? Is it because that they have to go through a number of administrative hurdles before they can place the elderly or PWD with the centers? Is it because they have to inform the centers, for example, 2 weeks in advance? Because the usage rate of these respite service places have been low at, for example, 50 to 60%. Have you figured out the reason for such low usage rate? When I communicated with the NGO or service providers, Jockey Club have collaborated with Hong Kong U to provide community carers or social workers who look after the elderly at their homes such that the carers have a break or they can attend to their personal matters. Will you promote this mode of support for carers? Will you include that in your scheme for respite service places? Just now, I received a letter from a NGO. They would like to encourage trained carers to go to the homes of the elderly and persons with disabilities to look after them. Another point, we have to solve the issue of elderly taking care of elderly. It would be elderly taking care of even older elderly or their peers. It accounts for about 30 to 40% of carers. Elderly does not have this capability to reach out to information online. And sometimes they're hidden because they don't have time to go to the community centers to look at the information available. I think that by including elderly as default members, it will be one of the measures to tackle the problem. For elderly taking care of elderly, how do you ensure this group of people will be made aware of the services available to them? Thank you. First question regarding respite service places. As mentioned in our paper, we do have vacancies, but how do we disseminate the information to needy carers? Currently, we need carers to make calls to respite service providers. Sometimes the calls did not go through, so the rate of use is rather low. So we propose this 24-hour hotline manned by NGO, such that NGOs can make referral services. And we have transport subsidy, such that carers can go to centers, for example, in other districts. So for this information dissemination, I think that we can work better in this area, and there are some details that we have to work out. On your second point regarding providing care at home, we do have them in some other schemes. It's set out in paragraph 11. We do have some home-based support services, but they are used by elderly under central waiting list. But for elderly that are outside central waiting list, they may not be benefited from such schemes. So how do we improve on this area? How do we help them? I think that we can explore that as our next step. These are my responses. Thank you. How do you address the problem of elderly taking care of elderly? Because it's rather difficult for elderly to obtain information online, and they are so busy, and that's why they cannot go to the community center to obtain information either. Well, for emergency cases, can we provide information to elderly such that they are made aware of the services available to them in case of emergency? That is why we provide such hotline. For community care teams, if team member knows someone is at risk at certain residential flat, then they can call the hotline on their behalf. Mr. Tin? Well, I will now extend this meeting by 15 minutes. So we will end the meeting at 1 p.m. Now there are two members who have pressed the button, Doreen Kwon and Lilian Kwong. Mr. Tin, do you have to put questions? If yes, you have to press the button. I will draw the line here. Mr. Tin, 4 minutes. Doreen Kwon, Lilian Kwok, and myself will have 3 minutes each. Mr. Tin, please excuse me. I just went to Tuen Mun Hospital expansion project. For the situation with carers, I actually met with some frontline organizations. Undersecretary was there as well. I asked for a 24-hour designated care hotline, which someone will pick up the line. For the person who have picked up the call, I hope that they can refer the case to professionals for follow-up. Third, I hope that the invitation for tender will not be too complicated, and that the period of service will not be too long per procurement. If it's too short, then there may be insufficient tenderers who are interested. But for taking care of SEN children, it's rather difficult. Some carers do not know how to take care of children with emotional problems because sometimes these children have insomnia. these carers want someone to listen to their experience and difficulties and help from professionals to teach them how they should address such problems. Now we have some transport services provided for carers, and they can call for these shuttles wherever they are, and they have a platform for this service. Can we have a better platform in Hong Kong? I think that if we have someone to pick up the call, for example, at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., to listen to these carers is better than having just someone who is not knowledgeable about the matter to pick up the calls. Can you get people who are experienced in being a carer to pick up the calls with this hotline and talk to people who are troubled at night, for example? Thank you, Mr. Tian, for your question. We do have a 24-hour hotline with someone picking up the call. On referral services, I think that this is important. Before referral, we have to further assess the risk level. So when the call is picked up, and if there is further assessment needed, then we will ask the carer for a face-to-face consultation to see their stress level and what their needs are. And we will, in accordance with the risk level, determine if we should follow up instantly or if further counseling is needed or should clinical psychologists attend to the carers. If necessary, social workers will follow up on the issue and make referrals. In terms of timetable, we will look at the needs for services and review the hotline on a year-to-year basis. We hear Mr. Tan's suggestion. There are carers with experience. We may invite the NGOs to collect the experience and wisdom of these experienced carers to help carers in need. I'm not asking for compilation of information, but if there is an experienced carers who can pick up the calls of an inexperienced carers who do not know how to handle the child, if an experienced carer sees such cases on their mobile phones, maybe they can talk to the inexperienced carers or carers in trouble immediately.
Yes, that's an excellent suggestion, which we endorse. So in our hotline scheme, there will be training of volunteers, and we can invite someone who's been through similar experiences to help. For instance, at first year, we have social workers to answer the phone and to triage, and if need be, there can be peers to discuss with the callers. If that can be done immediately, that's the best. All right. 3 more members, 2 minutes each. Mr. Rincon. Yes. The paper mentioned many measures. I know that the hotline will be rolled out later, but what about respite services and home respite services? Looking at SWD's website, I do not see any at a glance list. For instance, the phone number for a particular center, I can't find it from SWD. In 2006, you have got a pamphlet, support for carers project. There 6 pages, but there is no useful information there. For instance, you ask these questions. Are you taking care? Are you a carer? Do you feel exhausted? Well, you don't have any phone number for people to call for help. In other places, they have a very easy to use hotline or website, so the people can know at a glance where they can turn to for help. Thank you. Under Para 7, we say that we have already commissioned the Hong Kong University to develop this one-stop information gateway, which will be ready by the end of the year. Hopefully, we can use a user-oriented approach to design the website. It's true that for some of our information is too complicated, and we are redesigning our information gateway so it's easier for users to find NGOs they can turn to for help. So we are adopting a two-pronged approach to provide such information to users. I hope you can have the list as soon as possible, because SWD is supposed to have all the NGO information. Mr. Lin Kwok, I'd like to follow up on the question asked by Mr. Chen Hanpan on care teams. I have received inquiries from care teams. They are worried that there are people with mental or emotional problems in the community, and they're worried that they don't know how to handle should they come across such cases in the community. Now, you're asking care teams to support carers when they need to provide emotional support to carers. What scheme do you have to provide support to care teams as well? We set up a voluntary team last week, and we have started providing service. I think we need workshops and assessment services as a first-tier support, and also training for volunteers. In terms of support for carers, do you have similar resources available for them? Thank you. The positioning of care teams is to do referrals. We rely on professional social workers and NGOs to provide services. Hopefully, volunteers of care teams are made aware of such information. So district officers will provide training on communication skills, information on NGOs available in the districts, etc. There will be staff from social welfare department to help care team members to make proper referrals. And of course, if they don't know which is the right organization to refer to, they can divert it to our central team. I am talking about support to these care team members, so they won't be under such pressure. So what the administration told us right now was sufficient. All right, we will do so. Well, I'm the last to ask questions. Secretary, I have come across many organizations. Some are pressure groups, some are family teams or concerned groups receiving subsidy from government. And what they say is, while there are so many carers out there, there is no policy for carers. What is your response? Does the administration have a carer policy? I'd like to have an official reply from you. And secondly, our own research division has done some research. In some places, they turn their policy into an act that is a piece of legislation. For instance, persons with disabilities aged between 15 and 64, and only carers of these people will be included in their net. And for elderly persons, if they are fit, then their carers are not qualified for assistance. So my question is, carers, according to the government, may mean carers of frail elderly. What about carers for PWDs? Do you have any age range for such PWDs? In last year's policy address, we set out our policy for carers, which is to provide more support to carers. And now we are implementing this policy. I understand that more people would want to be included in the net. That is understandable. Our intention is to implement the policy announced by the government last year, and so that people who need care can be given more support. Now, if someone asks me, Chair of the WSP, does the government have a policy for carers? So I can say yes. Yes, we have a range of measures to support carers. All right, that is the official reply for members' information. That ends the discussion of this item. AOB, we don't have any. Thank you very much for attending the meeting. Meeting adjourned.
咩係呢個精彩？